It's going to be very emotional for me.
What up, everyone? Shaquille Mahjoudi here for CBS Sports, and you know who this is. He was the voice of a generation with WCW, and he's doing it all over again with All Elite Wrestling. And when he's not putting up with Nigel McGuinness or Taz or, God forbid, Don Callis, he's finding a little bit of time for me. Tony Schiavone, how's it going, my man?
Hey, Shaquille, putting up with those guys is exactly right. That's what I do. I put up with
You
them.
know, well, on that note, I always put out a fan Q&A. So I think before we dive into the majority of this conversation, one of the most requested questions here was sort of the fun dynamic between you, Taz, and Excalibur at the desk. When I asked this question, is there like a on-air rib or joke or something that you really struggle to keep your composure with that comes to mind when you're working with those guys?
Yeah, Taz can get easily upset. He has what we call a short fuse, and we know how to poke the bear. We really do. We just try not to do it, but we do it backstage. So when the tapes are rolling, so to speak, we know what we can do, but we just try to stay away from it. And I don't know if you have heard. I'm sure some of the fans have heard our commentary during the international break, what we call the
Yeah,
picture-in-picture breaks. Okay, our
yeah, I'm from
commentary is
Canada,
just,
so I got you.
yeah, it just we try to go off the rails, and we know that Tony Khan is like sometimes he runs to the bathroom during those breaks, so we know that he's not listening. So we get by with a lot of stuff, and so that's kind of what we do. But I really enjoy working with them. I really have a lot of fun with both the teams I work with. Taz is a lot of fun. We had so much fun as you and I are talking today. We had so much fun last night with Tony Storm with us, and she hit us with some of those lines that just absolutely broke us up.
Yeah.
So
If I'm to try and poke at Taz, if I ever get the pleasure of speaking to him,
mm,
what can I get away with without getting, suplexed or choked out?
talk about how the Mets suck and how the color orange is horrible. And let's see. Oh my gosh, I don't. Sometimes Shaq. Sometimes it just takes like something silly to get him going. Like if you don't, if he has a comment that he thinks is a good comment, and you don't immediately reply to it, it's like it goes off the rails. So,
Okay.
but yeah, I always give him a hard time about the Mets. Like we were at Arthur Ashe Stadium, and he
Hmm.
was talking about. He said, "Yeah, Shivani, a City Field is like right next door." And I said, "Yeah, I know. The Braves won a lot of games there." So it was just something like that I said on the air, and it got him going. So
I love it. Now, we are chatting ahead of Sting's retirement match. That's AEW Revolution on March 3rd. I mean, tickets are flying for that thing. It's
yeah,
very warming to see. And that venue, the Greensboro Coliseum in North Carolina, has tremendous significance, harkening all the way back to Ric Flair versus Sting in 1988, Clash of
yeah,
Champions, a match you were there to call.
right.
And man, I feel like we're going to spend so much time today talking about that. The first thing I kind of wanted to put into context, especially for some of the newer fans, how significant was that Sting versus Flair match on television in proving that Jim Crockett Promotions could compete with WWE, considering it was sort of counter programming to WrestleMania 4?
Right. That was all based, from what I recall, and I think I'm right. That was all based on what happened in Starrcade of '87.
Survivor Series, yeah.
Yeah, the Survivors, and when he counter-programmed that against Starrcade '87, and as the story goes, he told the cable systems, "You either take Survivor Series and you can't have WrestleMania." So a lot of the cable systems turned and ran from Jim Crockett Promotions. So that was counter programming to that. And also prior to that, I do know that we had attempted to, especially I think in '87, we had attempted to go national. We Jim Crockett Promotions. We started going to a lot of different cities, and I was a ring announcer for a lot of those. We went to, believe it or not, we were at the Forum in Los Angeles. We were out at Albuquerque. We were in Las Cruces. I remember the tour we took: Albuquerque, Las Cruces, Los Angeles, San Francisco. We just went a lot of places, and then we started going to Philadelphia, of course, in the Northeast a lot. So we started counter programming to Vince McMahon. I really think that the attempt was at that time that Jim Crockett Promotions, because of his clearance he had on TBS at that time, would be the leader of the NWA promoters trying to battle back Vince going national. And the match you're talking about at Clash of the Champions, a live event on TBS, was probably the biggest blow we had against Vince McMahon at that time.
What made Sting's character in the late, the pro wrestling as a constant star making effort. What made Sting's character in the late 80s so compelling and unique that it allowed Jim Crockett, excuse me, to sort of counter program him against Titans like Hulk Hogan?
Well, there's a lot of things. I've often believed in appearance and the colors that Sting used, and the bright colors. We called him, I guess now we call him Surfer Sting,
Yeah.
because the blonde spiked hair and the colored paint and the color on the tights and everything. That meant a lot. But all his enthusiasm
Mm.
was pretty contagious. And I can remember for the first time that I interviewed Sting was on the studios at TBS, and I've seen that match a couple of times since then. It's worth going back and looking because Jim Crockett bought Mid South or UWF at that time, and Sting was one of the wrestlers that he brought in. So he made his debut, and it was in '87. And so you can see it didn't take that long for Sting to become a major star from '87, probably around the summer or the fall of '87, probably less than a year. But he wasn't like one of those tremendous talkers like a Ric Flair or Arn Anderson,
Hmm.
but he was different in that, he shouted a lot, he screamed, he yelled, and fans bought into it. They were just they were his excitement was contagious, and plus the fact that he the kid for just having the bodybuilding experience, and I know he wrestled, he's wrestled some as a member of the Blade Runners before he got there. But as a bodybuilder, he had a great aptitude for wrestling. So it takes. I tell the kids we work with all the time. I say you can be the greatest wrestler in the world, but unless you can talk, unless you can bring the fans in and believe in your character, you're not you're not going to get quote unquote over. And Sting was able to do that.
Behind the scenes, what was sort of the impression that management had about Sting leading to him getting that opportunity, and how much was that validated, and how much did it sort of pave the way for him after going 45 minutes with Flair?
Well, backstage, Sting was just a good kid, and there's just like any other sport, any other team, you have good kids, you have kids that are pain in the asses, and kids, that are really high maintenance. He was not a high maintenance guy. He was very willing to work. He got along with the other guys extremely well, the same way he does today, and that goes a long way. If you're like promoters are more than likely going to use you a lot more if you are quote unquote willing to do a lot of things, willing to work. Um, you know, Shaquille, not everybody wants to lose, and but the ones that can lose and realize that that's not the end of the world will probably get ahead. And Sting was like that too. So there's a combination to really get a good push in wrestling. It's obviously what I've been talking about: being able to wrestle, being able to talk, being able to bring the fans into you and your character, and also I think to be a person backstage that is willing to do whatever it takes to try to get your character over. And Sting was always like that.
Last thing on that match specifically, they had some celebrity judges ringside to assure a
Yes.
decisive conclusion, and yet after the 45-minute timer, we still end up with a draw. Do you know how that came about? How, like, why was that the decision that was reached?
Well, I think I think they thought it was important for Sting's career not to lose to Ric Flair, and it
Mm-hmm.
was important for Ric Flair not to lose to Sting for the world title at that time. That whole match was to make Sting a major star, which is basically what it did. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk since that time about quote unquote dusty finishes where you really don't get a finish and you want to finish and you got a disqualification or you got a count out. And we've even had things to where, you know, uh, you think your hero had won the match and all of a sudden it gets reversed. That happens so many times. But I think this worked on many levels. I think it worked because the match went a long time, and Flair was the master at making people stars. He really, really was. And it's funny, Ric Flair used to always say, he said, we're a heel, we lose all the time, but we lie like hell about it. Ric Flair probably lost more matches than he ever won. But he is noted as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time because he knew how to make guy stars. And Sting was one of those stars that he made on that day with a big, big fan following as well. There was also, concern that you always want, and back then it was an arena business. Now it's a television show business. There was always a concern back then that we were not going to get enough people in the house. And realistically, and Conrad and I were talking about this on our podcast. We're going to have over 15,000 people coming up on March 3rd for Sting's final event, and that's about as many as we can put in there with production kills and whatnot. Back in 1988, when we went up against WrestleMania, we had 6,000 people. Only 6,000 were in the stands, but if you go back and you watch it, it looked like it was like you think about, it was a sellout crowd. It was crazy, and they were, but I think there was a concern that because of it being live on TV, it would hurt the gate, and maybe in a way it did. But it just shows you how wrestling has changed. Oh, it's changed on many levels, man.
Yeah, well, and it's an industry in which a select few can reign at the top and are kind of protecting those spots. And I know that you, Tony, have your reputation for the mustache. How do you feel about Hangman Adam Page quickly sort of approaching your position here?
Oh, I'm all for it. There have been people, and Excalibur's one of them. There have been people that says, you know what? You need just to go back to the mustache and shave the beard. And I said, well, then you need to take the mask off. Okay. We go back and forth. I've got the beard now because if I didn't have the beard, my double chin would flop down probably to my chest. So I keep the beard now, but I do know the mustache was old school Schiavone back in the TBS days that I lost when I went to the WWE.
Well, that's actually a wonderful segue, and unfortunately a reminder that I can't grow a beard, so I'm screwed once the
yeah, you can. Yes, you can. You just got to hang with it.
All right, you got to like trudge through the tougher days, and you come out the other side. Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah,
perfect. I appreciate that vote of confidence.
Yeah.
As someone who has sort of experienced, going over the WWE, you came back to Jim Crockett and WCW. What does it say about Sting that he held out for so long as a WCW Jim Crockett guy, staying with that promotion for the entirety of up to the end of its lifespan, didn't immediately make the jump to WWE, goes to TNA, and I think it's actually very fitting that his retirement is taking place in AEW. It just seems sort of more akin to Sting in his career. But yeah, what does it say about a guy who managed to stay put in one place in an industry where people were at that time especially constantly jumping wherever the biggest offer was?
I think it says a lot to his character, and I think it says a lot to him being comfortable about. He was living in the Metro Atlanta area. He had his family here, and he was very comfortable in what he was doing, and very comfortable in his position. So I think that's what it says a lot about the person. Everybody's different. Everybody has an ambition in our sport. I know I do, or at least when I was younger, I did an ambition in the sport. And sometimes that ambition is willing to go wherever it takes to get the biggest buck. Doesn't matter where you have to go. Sting was very comfortable in living in this area and very comfortable about the living that he made. And he was very loyal to Jim Crockett Promotions too. So I think that says a lot about him as a person.
As we wrap up here, what is it going to feel like for you to, at least in an in-ring active capacity, say it's Sting on that night?
It's going to be very emotional for me, Shaquille. I've already talked to the guys in production about this, and I said, listen, after the match is over, do you want me to roll into the ring and interview him? And they said, well, we're not sure yet. And I said, oh man, come on, I've got to. And I usually don't push for stuff. I usually just like, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. But I would, because I was there for Ric Flair's final match in Nashville, and I got to interview Rick right after the match at ringside. I think it would be very special for me on a very selfish personal note to be able to roll in the ring and to be able to say hello or say goodbye to him, and be able to say it's Sting one more time to the fans there, because if I say it on TV, the fans won't hear it in the
Mm-hmm.
Greensboro Coliseum. But if I say with the stick mic, the fans will be able to hear it and react to it, and I'm sure members of his family will be around, his friends. It's going to be a very, very special moment, and I'm very fortunate, really, really am, to be a part of this. I really am. When I think about my career, I think about you want a beagle?
Yeah,
When,
I love guests on the
yeah,
show. So
yeah, okay. So this is Scout. She's the newest one, and she's out of her
awesome.
mind. We love her though. Anyway, we when I think about my career, and I've talked about this a lot on my podcast, that I feel as a wrestling announcer or even as an announcer, very, very fortunate to be tied to Sting, to Ric Flair, to Lex Luger, to some of the real great stars of wrestling, even Hulk Hogan uh, back. And I know Gene Okerlund did a lot of the interviews, but I feel when I look online and I see Ric Flair's picture at on a
Mm.
TBS Studios, I'm standing there holding a microphone. That still today gives me a lot of pride and a lot of great feelings about what I've done in this business. And I feel that same way with Sting. So I look forward to that night. I look forward to being a part of it.
Last thing here for you, Tony, especially for maybe some of the newer fans who didn't get to witness much of Sting, or maybe they're just being introduced to Sting through AEW. If you could sort of write the Sting story in a few sentences, just sort of summarize what his legacy is and what he's meant to pro wrestling and
Right.
how he sort of stood out on your own, what would you say?
I would say that he has meant a lot, not only to the fans, but to the people in the industry. And I say that based on this. When Sting first arrived into AEW, I didn't know he was coming back. And I knew there had been rumors that, hey, we may get Sting. Sting may sign with us. I really wasn't working that much in the front office back then. And so we were backstage that day, and Cody Rhodes told me, he said, listen, let's go say hello to your friend. And I went, okay, let's go say hello to my friend. Who you talking about? He said, come on, follow me. We walked back, and we're in Jacksonville. We walked back into this trailer, and open door, and there's Sting. And it just kind of blew me away. So we go out, we do the show. Sting stays in his trailer the entire day. And then when his music hits, the fans, and of course it was the pandemic time, and we had mostly wrestlers around. If
Hmm.
you recall back then, wrestlers, and these music hits, they still weren't sure. But when he stepped through, I looked at the wrestlers, the young wrestlers, and they were going bananas. They were absolutely losing their mind. They were giving each other high fives and everything. And I remember thinking, I would have loved to seen been in the backstage area when Sting just walked slowly from his trailer, walked by everybody with the wrestlers backstage, and seeing that. He has been such a great leader, and he wasn't always that way. He was one of the younger ones, but he developed in such a great leader because of his personality and because he is so willing to do whatever it takes. I mean, he's done a lot for Darby Allin. He really has. He's done a lot for AEW. My gosh, and he realizes that. So I think his legacy is going from a guy who became a star thanks to Ric Flair and the machine of the NWA back then, to a guy who has assumed that leadership role and means as probably as much to pro wrestlers these days as he does to the fans.
I don't think there's a better way to cap this off, Tony. I want to leave you with the last word, so I'll do my part very quickly. Guys, thanks so much for checking out the video. Please, if you can, subscribe, tap the bell, thumbs up, all that good stuff. Let us know in the comments section, what is your favorite Sting memory ahead of AEW Revolution? That's on March 3rd at the Greensboro Coliseum in North Carolina. Check out the full feature on CBSSports.com in the description of this video. Tony, if there's any parting words you have, the floor is yours, man.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I would like to thank all the fans for the support of AEW and for my career. Sometimes I sit down and I'm thinking, man, at my age, look at me. I'm still a part of pro wrestling that 5 years ago I never thought I would be. So I really appreciate everybody. I appreciate you, Shaquille, talking with, being able to talk with you, and I appreciate all the fans, what they've done for my career and for AEW. It's been a great ride.